Just wanted to welcome you all for joining us this evening at 6 p.m. And while we talk about this really important topic, the energy transition in Ontario. Just wanted to mention that this meeting will be recorded. And for those of you who want to ask questions, we just ask if you could write them down, and there'll be some time towards the end after the presentation to ask questions. So we're just going to start with a land acknowledgement. And yeah, it's important to do as we gather here today to discuss climate change and the energy transition. It's important to acknowledge the land that we live, work, and learn on here in Hamilton. So these lands are the traditional territories of the Erie, the Adenawandara, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and the Anishinaabe peoples. So for generations, Indigenous peoples have been stewards of this land, guided by agreements like the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, which called for shared care of resources in the Great Lakes region. The spirit of stewardship reminds us of our shared responsibility to care for the environment and its resources. We also acknowledge the Between the Lakes Purchase of 1792, an agreement between the Crown and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. While settlers viewed it as a land transfer, Indigenous peoples saw it as a commitment to shared stewardship. So the resulting dispossession and colonization have had enduring consequences on this land and its peoples, which are still felt today. So our journey towards reconciliation must be active and enduring. It requires us to move beyond words into continuous learning and meaningful action to care for this land, those who live here and those who will follow. So thank you for reflecting on these responsibilities with us as we begin today's conversation. So I'm just going to introduce our speaker, which is Green Ventures Energy Program Coordinator. Her name is Nicole Raitakari, and I'm going to pass it over to her now to start our presentation.
Thanks so much, Jacqueline. Thank you, everyone, so much for joining us for this webinar today. We're here to discuss the energy transition in Ontario. So I'm just going to give you a quick overview of what we'll be talking about. First, we're going to start by gaining an understanding of what the energy transition is and what's driving the changes in Ontario. Secondly, we'll be discussing the anatomy of the energy grid in Ontario. And then we'll be exploring innovations in energy at the residential level. Finally, we'll be learning about opportunities that you have, I have, and all community members have to support the energy transition. All right, Jacqueline, if you could hit the next slide.
Yep.
Okie dokie. So what exactly is the energy transition? The energy transition is about moving away from fossil fuels and shifting towards cleaner, more sustainable energy sources. One of the big drivers in this shift is decarbonization. We're seeing it through things like more electric vehicles on the road, switching to electric home heating, and industries that are rapidly adopting electrification. Take Dofasco, for example. If you've ever driven into Hamilton, you've definitely seen these iconic smokestacks. The Dofasco project is a big part of Hamilton's energy transition. They're working to decarbonize their steel production by moving away from coal and using alternative energy sources. The goal is to cut down emissions, which helps us meet our climate targets and move towards cleaner energy. And that is their goal by 2028, so we're definitely keeping an eye on it. However, there is a catch. These changes will create a huge increase in electricity demand. If you look at the graphs I have on the screen, the top one shows the projected spike in industrial electricity use. At the top, you'll see green steel production, Dofasco, Algoma, and all of them. And below, you'll see today's system capacity versus the capacity that we would need to have to meet our projected demand. By 2050, Ontario's electricity demand is expected to double or even triple from what we're using now. That's driven by several factors, the electrification of cars, home heating, and industries, along with population growth and climate change. Just think about how warm it's been this year. We're currently in October and I am toasty. The demand for cooling is only going to continue to rise as our climate changes. And if you could hit the next slide. Thanks. So, what's driving the energy transition? Climate change. A big factor is climate change, and Canada's response has been pretty clear. Under the Canadian Net Zero Emissions Accountability Act, we've committed to reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 40 to 45% below our 2005 levels by 2030 and to reach net zero emissions by 2050. This isn't just about cutting emissions at the household level, it's a complete transformation of how industries and energy generation operate. And to get there, we'll all need to work together because it is a huge undertaking. In Ontario, we've made great strides. The electricity sector now accounts for less than 5% of Ontario's emissions, thanks to the shutdown of all coal-fired power plants in 2013. We were the first jurisdiction in all of North America to do that, so props to Ontario. However, with electricity demand set to rise and our commitment to a net zero future, the need for clean energy is enormous. If you'll take a look at this graph on the right, it shows how Ontario's energy mix will need to evolve to meet future demands. You'll notice that we're planning a major increase in non-emitting energy sources like wind, solar, and hydrogen. While natural gas is still part of our current mix, by 2050, we've committed to phasing it out fully in favor of clean energy sources. All right, next slide. So let's take a bit of a closer look at Ontario's current energy mix. If you'll refer to the top left image, this shows the capacity of all of our energy generation sources, the maximum that each can produce. Right now, about 1/3 of our total capacity comes from natural gas. Despite this large capacity, gas and oil only account for 13% of our actual energy output. Nuclear and hydro, on the other hand, are running at full throttle all the time, providing most of our electricity. When we hit peak demand in the afternoon, when it's hot and everyone has their AC on, that's when natural gas plants get fired up to meet the extra demand. So if we want to be mindful of our energy use, it helps to be aware of these peak times. Even small actions like delaying when you use your high energy appliances like your dryer during those peak periods can make a difference. When it comes to how electricity is generated, we have kind of two key types, that is baseload generation and peaking generation. So if you take a look on the right, baseload generation is provided by nuclear and hydro plants, which generate a really steady, reliable supply of electricity at all times. This is really crucial to keeping our grid stable. As part of our energy transition, we're very committed to expanding this baseload capacity with projects like refurbishing existing plants and also constructing new small modular reactors to meet rising demand. As demand increases throughout the day, we rely on renewable energy sources as much as we can. However, when we reach peaking generation, natural gas plants step in. These plants can adjust their output really quickly, which makes them key players in managing demand fluctuations throughout the day. So currently, natural gas generation is still critical for managing our peak loads and supporting demand as we refurbish and build new baseload generators. We're hoping that Ontario's climate change commitments mean that we'll be shortly phasing out natural gas in the future as we transition to cleaner energy sources. All right, next slide. Okay, so let's take a quick look at the anatomy of Ontario's electricity grid and a few of the key players involved in keeping the lights on. Firstly, we have the Government of Ontario through the Ministry of Energy. They set the overall policy for the energy sector. They create laws and regulations that guide how things are operating. Next is the OEB, or Ontario Energy Board, and they regulate the energy sector in the public interest. They oversee rates, they make sure the system's fair, and they ensure that we all have access to reliable energy. Then we have the IESO, or Independent Electricity System Operator, and they manage the province's electricity market, and they ensure that supply meets demand in real time. Now, some of you might remember Ontario Hydro, which was once an integrated utility managing everything. like generation, transmission, distribution. Back in 1998, under the Mike Harris government, Ontario Hydro was split up into different organizations, which is the Ontario Power Generation OPG, and they still handle a lot of electricity generation, the IESO, as mentioned, Hydro One, and the Electrical Safety Authority, or ESA. So while the OPG and IESO are still crown corporations, Hydro One is now a publicly traded company. So if you'll take a look at this image on the right, this is the traditional grid as we've known it. Every step of the way, you'll notice that the Ontario Energy Board is involved, ensuring that things run smoothly and fairly. So here's how the energy flows. It all starts with generating electricity. So hydro, nuclear, natural gas, wind, and solar. Starts at generation. Then we move through to transmission. So transmitters transport the power over really long distances through high voltage lines, which is also known as the transmission grid until it reaches your local utility. Then we get to your utility. So they are responsible for the distribution system. That's all the wires and equipment that bring electricity directly to your home or business. You'll recognize them from the name on the bill that you get every month. Finally, the power reaches you, the customer. You get to decide how and when you use the electricity, and you make choices that can affect both your costs and your energy footprint. So at a high level, this is how Ontario's energy grid works. And next. All right, who distributes electricity in Hamilton? For those of you in Hamilton, Electric Utilities is most likely your local electricity distributor, but we also have Hydro One, which serves part of the region as well. In the image on the left, you'll see Electra's service territory in the green. And on the right, this kind of zoomed out map will show you Hydro One service area in light gray. They're covering a large part of the province. Hydro One has two roles. So they transmit power across Ontario and they sell electricity to local distribution companies or LDCs like Electra, who then sell it to customers. In any location where there is no LDC, Hydro One will handle the distribution directly to customers. Anywhere where there is an LDC, Hydro One will not own or operate the local infrastructure. It is also important to note that the electricity prices in Ontario are regulated by the Ontario Energy Board, so not your local utility or Hydro One. They don't set the rates, the OEB does, and whenever a utility submits a rate application to the OEB, that is publicly available information. The OEB will post it online for anyone to see and for your reference. All right, next please. So let's talk about the types of electricity rates you can choose from. These are from Electra's Choose My Rate option. One important thing to remember is that as the customer, you have the right to choose your rate. Right now, there are three options available, one of which the ultra low overnight rate was introduced quite recently. So to get into these, the first one we have is the time of use option. This divides the day into three price periods. There's off-peak, mid-peak, and on-peak. The price that you pay depends on when you're using electricity, with higher rates during periods of high demand, like during the peak load times. And that is because peak periods are when we have high demand. They require the use of natural gas, which is more expensive and produces more emissions. Smart thermostats are really good tools under this kind of rate. So if you're not home, you can reduce your usage during those really high cost times. The next option is tiered rates. This option is definitely simpler. It's a little bit less environmentally friendly. So you pay one price for a set amount of electricity each month and then a higher price if you exceed that amount. The downside of that being there is no incentive to shift your usage away from peak times, so it doesn't encourage you to avoid using electricity during the times when demand is highest. And then we have the ultra low overnight, the most recent option. This one's brand new. It's designed to help people manage energy use during overnight hours when demand is quite low. It's similar to time of use, but with drastically lower rates between 11 p.m. and 7 a.m. It's perfect for those who own electric vehicles because you can charge your car overnight, which could save you a lot of money. If you look at the rate, the ultra low overnight rate is the absolute lowest rate for any of these energy options. So if you set a timer for your EV or any other battery systems to start charging after 11 p.m., you could save a lot of money. So these options let you know the rate that best fits your lifestyle and energy needs. Next, please. All right, so this next section of this presentation, we'll be talking about energy sector innovations applicable at the residential level. So we're going to get into conservation and demand management, distributed energy resources and microgrids, and then finally, battery energy storage solutions. All right, so let's talk about conservation and demand management and how it helps people manage their energy costs and reduce their overall electricity demand. CDM programs are delivered by the IESO, Independent Electricity System Operator, but they would be administered by your local utility. The current framework is actually running from January 2021 to December 2024, so keep an eye out for an upcoming new framework, but the current one is about finding ways to save energy and reduce strain on the grid. One example of this is greenhouse energy management. In southwestern Ontario, there are a ton of greenhouses and they use lots of energy. CDM programs offer mechanisms to reduce their energy consumption, which is driving changes to the grid in that region. For those who are familiar with Green Ventures work, we offer support to homeowners who are retrofitting their homes by performing energy assessments and helping them access incentive programs like the Canada Greener Homes Loan, which encourages them to upgrade their homes to meet current efficiency standards. Retrofitting would often involve addressing the building envelope to not waste energy, heating or cooling the outdoors, or transitioning away from gas and oil heating to electric options like heat pumps. So you're aware, nearly 45% of emissions in the Greater Toronto Hamilton area come from buildings, and 91% of those emissions come from on-site natural gas use for water and space heating. So we consider that shift to be crucial. On the residential demand side, demand response programs are a great example of how CDM works. Take Hydro One's My Energy Rewards program. On very hot days, if you have a smart thermostat and you signed up for the program, they might raise your home's temperature by a couple of degrees for a couple of hours. What's happening is those small changes across all 25,000 participating homes created massive energy savings of 14 megawatts last year. That is the equivalent of a solar farm. So this is an example of peak cutting or peak clipping, where instead of building new power plants, we're reducing demand by making adjustments. Another approach to this would be peak shifting, which is moving energy use off of the peak. So to off-peak times, this would look like time of use. So charging your electric vehicles overnight, running your laundry later, taking advantage of your lower rates, and reducing pressure on the grid during high demand hours. So both peak cutting and peak shifting are pretty essential strategies to managing energy demand more efficiently. Next, please. Okay, so distributed energy resources and microgrids, they are key to the energy transition, and they offer a new way of thinking about how we generate and use electricity. So DERs are energy resources that they can generate, they can store, and they can or manage energy directly on the distribution system or behind a customer's meter. These technologies provide cost-effective alternatives to traditional electricity infrastructure, like the classic poles and wires you see everywhere. They offer valuable support to the grid, including services like frequency regulation and also helping maintain grid stability. I want to break down a little bit what behind the meter and front of meter mean when it comes to these technologies. So behind the meter refers to energy generation or management system that operate on the customer side of the meter. That means the energy is primarily for on-site use and it kind of reduces reliance on the grid. For example, you'll see the picture here that is Green Ventures office. It's called Eco House. There we have two solar arrays. So one was set up to power batteries for our backup energy. However, the other one feeds excess energy into the grid. So we get two electric bills every month, one for all the power we use on site, and then another that shows a credit for all of the electricity that we fed back into the grid. Front of meter systems are larger typically, and they're connected to the utility grid before the electricity meter. So those systems might be like a utility scale solar farm. They generate electricity that feeds directly into the grid to then be distributed to homes and businesses. So this shift to DERs and microgrids is really forcing us to think outside the traditional model of energy. I showed you that one image. It's generation, transmission, gets to your house, you use it. Instead, we're seeing a more dynamic system that increases efficiency, it saves money, and it also helps you to build resilience. It requires more participation from consumers. That might look like, installing solar panels or storing energy or shifting your energy use to off-peak times. So this is helping transform the energy landscape. It's giving us more flexibility and innovation. And I can't wait to see what people come up with next. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so let's dive into battery energy storage solutions. Kind of a mouthful, and how they are shaping the future of our energy system. If you'll take a look at this pie chart, which is showing the existing and projected energy storage capacity, we can expect a significant increase in the amount of battery storage connected to the grid. One interesting example of energy storage is the Niagara Hydro Project, which in this case, part of the river is diverted into a reservoir, which is effectively acting like a battery, and it's being stored there and released as needed, which is helping to manage demand. So battery energy storage systems work by drawing and storing electricity during off-peak times when demand is low, generation is clean, and the prices are affordable. Then they can return that stored energy to the system during peak demand times when electricity prices are higher. This means they can help sell electricity back to the grid at a more favorable price. The benefits of this are significant. This allows us to use more non-emitting energy during peak periods and also enhance the overall reliability of our electricity. A really great example of this in action and nearby us is the Oneida project on Six Nations of the Grand River. There's an image of that on this slide. So this project is a battery project designed to store really large amounts of energy and then to be sold back to the grid during peak demand periods, which is kind of illustrating how communities can leverage battery storage to support the grid. Looking ahead, we see that electric vehicle batteries, and this is exciting, could meet short-term grid storage demands as soon as 2030. So imagine charging your vehicle during off-peak hours, or if you're really committed using solar energy, you could then sell that stored energy back to the grid during peak times if you didn't need to drive, or in emergencies, your car could act as a backup power source for your home. So the ultra low overnight rate is also an added incentive to this, which is encouraging you to charge your EV at night when electricity rates are lowest. This is just saving you money, but also contributing to a more stable, energy efficient grid. So yeah, battery energy storage solutions are an exciting piece of the puzzle as we move toward a more sustainable energy future. Okay, so there are opportunities for you, for me, for everyone in the community to support the energy transition. First and foremost, education is key. Take your time to learn about your energy use and how it impacts the environment. Understanding your current energy situation and the situation in Ontario will empower you to make more informed decisions. There are also plenty of resources available online and community workshops that can help you grasp the complexities of energy consumption, renewable options, and the overall landscape of energy production. The more that you know, the better equipped that you are to contribute to a sustainable future. Next would be advocacy. All of our voices matter, and I think it's really important to raise your voice to these subjects. So please support local projects aimed at decarbonization and encourage, both government and industry to take aggressive steps towards reducing emissions. You can participate in community meetings, you can write to your reps, you can join advocacy groups. When we collectively express our desire for clean energy solutions, I think that together we can influence policy changes and, help Canada meet our net zero goals. Lastly, I invite you to think about home retrofits. Making changes to your home is a powerful way to move away from fossil fuels in your day-to-day life and towards renewable energy. This could look like, at a very high level, installing solar panels, upgrading to energy efficient appliances, or transitioning like from gas heating to electric options like heat pumps. So these will lower your carbon footprint, and they can also lead to eventually savings on your energy bills. If you do have questions about how to get started with retrofitting your home, we are here to help. Our team at Green Venture can totally assist you with energy assessments and connect you to available incentive programs that can help make these changes more accessible. Yeah, I would like to encourage you all to get involved. Some of these actions may seem small, but they definitely can create a ripple effect that leads to meaningful change. So yeah, please actively participate in the energy transition, and I hope that together we can build a more sustainable future for Hamilton and the rest of Canada. All right, thanks so much. So we have, I think, 8 minutes left before our meeting ends because we are on a free Zoom plan. But I definitely welcome you folks to ask us any questions that you have. And if you have to head out, thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, feel free to unmute if you have questions or if you want to put your question in the chat. I can also go back to any of the slides as well if any of the photos you want to see.
Hi, Nicole. I have a question for you.
Hi.
Wondering if you'll be able to share this presentation in any way. There's lots of links to resources that might be useful. Wondering if there's an avenue to distribute.
Definitely, we will be sending a follow-up email to everyone that signed up for this presentation on Eventbrite, and that can include these slides. I'll also make sure to include links to everything that was linked in the presentation that you folks weren't able to click on. And also there will be a recording of the webinar attached. All right, well, if we don't have any more questions, I think we can start getting wrapped up here. I do want to thank you all so much for taking the time out of your day to come and learn about the energy transition with us. If you end up having questions at any point, you're always welcome to reach out to me. My email is at the bottom there. It's nicole.raitakari@greenventure.ca, or you can reach out to the energy team at energy@greenventure.ca. We're very passionate about energy efficiency, especially in our community. So all of your questions are always welcome. And thanks again for joining us.